Bradshaw show is on. The Bradshaw. Come on, one and all. I extend an invitation to the Bradshaw. Join in the conversation. Transforming behavior, recognizing our Savior, overcoming hurdles, achieving dreams. Together we can succeed.
Hi, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining us on The Paula Show. Tonight we're speaking about land, property, squatters' right, and wills. Sherrie and Bradshaw is here. She's an attorney at law. Do you know that if someone occupies a property for more than 20 years uninterrupted by the owner, that person can claim squatters' rights? We will be discussing that and much more on The Paula Show tonight. Stay with us, please. We'll be right back after a commercial break. Thank you for joining us on The Paula Show. Remember to watch The Paula Show via CTV Channel 2 on Tuesday nights at 9 and Sundays there's a rebroadcast at 1 in the afternoon. The Paula Show inspires, entertains, and transforms behavior. Like me as well on Facebook, The Paula Show. And please watch The Paula Show episodes via YouTube, The Paula Show TV. Tonight on set with us, as always, the brilliant Sherrie and Bradshaw,
Good
attorney
evening.
at law.
Good evening.
It's always a pleasure having you
Always a pleasure
here.
to be
we
here.
Look forward. Exciting conversation.
Yep.
2 parts, part 1 and next week part 2.
Yeah.
We're speaking about lands and property and wills and squatters' rights. That one rocked me for 6. So we'll get to that. But first of all, if someone decides to sell a parcel of land, you told me that a purchase agreement is required.
It is required, and the reason why a purchase agreement is required is because persons need to know specifically what it is that they are purchasing. So they need to
parcel of
know
land.
that they need to know they're purchasing a parcel of land, but where is that parcel of land?
Yes.
What size is that parcel of land, and the cost of that parcel of land.
So what document will indicate the size, the
register.
the local, the
There is
location?
there is a document called the register, the land register, and you get that land register from the land registry department. So all you basically need is the block and parcel number of a parcel of land. You take that information to the land registry and you ask them for a copy
The
of
purchaser takes this information.
it's a public
Anyone?
document.
Okay.
It's a public document that you can get from the land registry at a fee. And the fee for the register is $60.
So whether or not you're purchasing a parcel of land, if you just want to find out information about,
Yes.
you can make a request at the land registry.
And it's a walk-in. You walk in. Once you have the block and parcel number, you give the clerks the block and parcel number. They pull the register. You ask for a copy, and a copy is $60.
that.
As simple as that.
$60.
$60 because it's a public document. If it is that you don't know the particulars of the land and you may have a general idea as to where the land is, you can go to the survey department. You can ask survey clerks there to do a search. They actually give you a Google of the area, so you can actually
high-tech.
narrow down where the parcel of land is. If you know the name of the individual but you don't know the particulars, you can go to the land registry and you can do a search, a name search. And the name search, it may pull up if the person have a lot of parcels. It would pull up all their parcels of land. But if you know that they have land in a specific area, you can narrow your search
So the
down just to that.
registration document,
The land register.
the land register.
Yes.
It will always have the name of
It
the
has
person
the name
who
of the
owns
person
the
who owns it.
parcel of
As a
land.
matter of fact, the land register gives you the history of ownership of the land.
So if 5 persons owned it,
You would
it's
see
right
it reflected there. As the owners change a line, their name is struck out through a line. If there are any bank liens, you flip to the back in the encumbrance section, and you will see the financial institution
So
and
you
the
want to
amount.
make sure that when you're purchasing a parcel of land, that there is no other interest,
You
bank or
want to
otherwise.
make sure when you're purchasing a parcel of land that the person who is selling the parcel of land is the owner.
It's the rightful owner.
That is the first thing you want to
Yes.
make sure, that they are the owners
People
of
do
the land.
sell lands
Yes.
that aren't theirs.
Yes. Some persons are of the view that my grandmother told me that that land is mine, but your grandmother is deceased. There has to be you have to go through either probate or a letters of administration process, and you may not be the next person in line in terms of beneficial interest.
Because the grandmother might
Because
have
the grandmother
children
may
alive.
have children who are alive. If your parent is not alive, if your
Yes.
parent is not alive, you get what your parents' share is supposed to be, but you don't take precedence over the living
children.
and surviving children. So it's important to get the register, firstly, one, to ensure that the person who is selling the land is in fact the owner of the land and has the authority to sell the land, and two, that there are no other interest in the land, not only bank interests, but you may have someone that may have lodged a caution on the land, someone who may have said, I have a beneficial interest in this parcel of land. You find that with a lot of cases with married couples who may be going through a divorce, and not even going through a divorce, because it may be registered in one party's name,
Yes.
when the wife may have an interest in it, but she's not the legal owner, but she's the beneficial owner.
She gave you some box money.
She
towards
either gave you
it.
box money, or she helped in the construction in some way, and the land is only legally registered
In the
in
husband's
your
name.
name. So of course it is the legal owner who would effect the transfer. But once you see like a caution or a restriction, red flags really supposed to flare up.
Yeah.
Because you then want to know, okay then, am I going to have issues as it relates to getting complete and absolute ownership of this parcel of land? So it is, you investigate by first getting the land registered before.
And the land certificate is, the register is actually more up to date than the land certificate.
Correct. I tell people all the time, it's really not important to even have a land certificate. You have people that say, oh, I want a title deed in my hand. Yeah, it's not a big deal. Because
register is more
if you lose
important.
that land certificate or / title deed, as old people like to say, you have to pay plenty money to get it back. But if you have the register will even tell you if a land certificate has been issued. So I tell people all the time, look,
title deed, no big deal.
you don't, title deed, no big deal.
Who is responsible for creating the purchasing agreement?
Ordinarily, it is the seller's responsibility, because you are the one proposing that your land is to be sold and for the price. Of course, an agreement is something that is mutually agreed between the parties.
So we both have to sign.
You both have to
and date.
agree to the contents first.
Terms and conditions.
You have to first agree to the terms and conditions. And an important term and condition in a sales agreement for any land or any property is the purchase price.
The purchase price. And who's responsible for setting the price? The
seller normally sets the price.
But we need a second opinion.
It is best to, when a seller sets a price, you ask the seller, as a purchaser, okay then, how did you come by this price? Is it that you got a valuation? 80,000. You see, it's always best to get a valuation. So I know some sellers, they have unrealistic prospects of getting.
It's a valuable parcel of land.
It might be valuable for them, but value marketable wise.
So I'm selling and I'm asking for 80,000, but the valuation is 50,000.
You're gonna have a problem. Especially if a purchaser is going to a financial institution, because that financial institution is not going to lend him a penny over $50,000.
Because the financial institution will be
the financial
reviewing
institution
the
would have,
valuation.
the financial institution would have gotten the valuation of their own. So that is why it's always best as a seller, if you're going to be selling a parcel of land, get a valuation first so that you know realistically what the value
off track.
of the land is. So once you get the valuation, you share the valuation with the purchaser, you sit down, you have a discussion, you work out the terms and conditions such as the purchase price, you work out things such as completion date, if you're going to be paying a deposit, how much
let's
deposit.
talk about that in the next segment.
Yes.
Because this is becoming very interesting. Because if I think my land is valued at $80,000 and the valuator values it at $50,000, well, he has to.
No, but then you have to realize that you're not
That's
a valuator.
$30,000 off.
But you're not a valuator.
But my grandparents, who offered the land to me, purchased it for $85,000.
No,
so why should I lose?
No, if your grandparents purchased it for $85,000,
And I'm giving you a steal of a deal by selling it for $80,000.
no. If your grandparents purchased it for $85,000, you're hardly going to get a valuation coming in below that.
The $85,000.
Before the $85,000, because how valuators valuate property is based on the cost of parcels of land over a period of time. So they would have seen this transfer of a parcel of land, similar
because
nature
that
in the area.
information would be at the registry.
At the land registry. Because there's a transfer document, and we will discuss that later.
In the next segment.
But get a valuation done. You then approach your intended purchaser. Disclose to the purchaser what the valuation says. Even if it is that the valuation says $80,000 and you want to sell it for $80,000, there's not a problem with that because you're not selling it at a higher market value. You then have a discussion as to whether or not if any deposit will be paid, and then you go on for a date of completion. Yes.
We're going to get to the deposit and the date of completion in the next segment. Thank you very much for staying with us on the Paula Show. Interesting conversation tonight. Please do not go any place. And it's a part 1 for this week, and we'll follow up next week with a part 2. Sherrie and Bradshaw, attorney at law, is here with us. We'll be right back following this brief commercial break. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. I return to my conversation with Ms. Bradshaw. We were talking about whether it's going to be a deposit or we're paying full price. So if it is a deposit, what is required? Get the money from the financial institution and I pay you a percentage?
No. Normally, if it's going to be a deposit that is paid, you get the money, the deposit from your own personal
really?
finances. So what you actually find happening is that most persons who are going through the bank, in the agreement, it would state that the purchaser is seeking financial institution, monies from a financial institution, and as a result of that, the usual deposit to be paid will not be paid. But the seller anticipates and expects that the purchaser will zealously make the application towards completion of the contract.
And generally, the completion date for this purchase agreement, when the full amount should be paid,
Yes.
it's over days, months, years?
It's sometimes 30 days, 45 days, 60 days, whatever the parties agree with. But realistically, I would tell anyone in terms of a completion date for a property, 45 to 60 days. And the reason for that
2 months
is 2 months max. And the reason for that is when you are dealing with a land transfer, you have to send the transfer to the Inland Revenue Department for valuation. So you have to give the Inland Revenue Department some time within which to get that valuation back to you. And they normally work within like maybe 4 to 6 weeks in terms of getting that document back to you. Sometimes 3 weeks, but you know, you give sufficient time,
Lead time.
so that you are not in breach of the contract, or so that you don't have to unnecessarily apply for an extended closing date. So 45 to 60 days is a sufficient time period. Now back to the deposit. You would ask yourself, you know, deposit, why deposit, and if you're asking for a deposit, how much? Now, the importance of a deposit is this primarily. When a deposit is paid by a purchaser as requested by the seller, that seller cannot entertain any further bids for the parcel of land until the date for completion or any extended time for completion has passed.
So you're totally committed
You're
to the
bound.
purchaser.
You're bound. You
Okay.
have to wait. You can't advertise. You can't enter into any other sales agreement or arrangement with another third party for the purchase of that land. So you might be selling
But
your
that's
land.
a disadvantage to the seller.
It's not a disadvantage, because either which way, the seller still would have to wait for the valuation to come back from Inland Revenue.
And suppose I accept a deposit and then you do not qualify at the bank for some reason or another to get a loan. Because remember, you said I'm using my personal funds to satisfy the deposit requirement.
Yeah, because the bank is not going to give you the
Fine.
deposit amount.
Okay, fine. So I applied to the bank or credit union for the full sum.
Yes.
But I might have had several loans, maybe credit cards outstanding, whatever the case is.
Yes.
And I am not a successful candidate.
Right.
What happens to my deposit?
Now, before I answer that question, it is important for purchasers, when they are thinking about purchasing land, to first go into their financial institution to see if they will be pre-approved.
Okay.
So once you know that, hey, you will be pre-approved, it is least likely that you will not get approval when you actually go and make the formal application. So it's very important for purchasers to be candid with their banks
Yes.
when approaching the banks for financing.
I'm purchasing a parcel of land.
Yes.
This is the cost.
Yes.
Do you think I'll qualify for a loan for this
be
sum?
open. Let them know what your expenses are. Give them an idea as to what
Yes.
your expenses are, what your debt ratio is, things of that sort. So your financial institution can work with you as best as possible to facilitate you
And if
getting
the
this
loan
loan.
might not be ready at the completion date, what about a qualifying letter? I
You-
understand sometimes a
Yes.
qualifying letter is issued.
Right. But
And
they,
that would satisfy the seller, a
yes,
qualifying letter?
but there should be no reason why the loan would not be approved by the completion date, unless, of course, the purchaser
yes.
has defaulted in presenting certain documentation to facilitate the approval of the loan to his or her financial institution. That is why there is that clause in there in terms of when you're not paying a deposit. It says that the seller is aware that the purchaser is seeking financing from a bank. The seller anticipates that the purchaser will zealously make every effort to facilitate the financing from the said financial institution. So once you have an agreement for sale, it then becomes the purchaser's responsibility, if he or she is seeking financing from the bank, to do what they have to do to get the loan approved.
Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. More information coming up. Stay with us, please. Okay, there's a purchasing agreement.
Yes.
There's no deposit.
Yes.
The seller decided, okay, you're approaching the bank for this loan. The completion date has been agreed. But then the purchaser defaults for some reason.
Yes,
And
the agreement is at an end. The vendor, the seller, has the right to terminate the contract and sell his land or his or her land to anyone that they choose to sell it to. Or alternatively, if they choose to take the purchaser to court, they can take the purchaser to court for breach of contract and or specific performance of the contract. So you ask, what is specific performance?
I was just about to ask.
Specific performance is exactly what I've said. To perform the terms of the contract.
The purchasing agreement.
Yes, that is what specific
So you
performance
failed
is.
to do that.
You failed to do so. So I have not breached any terms and
I waited
conditions.
on you. I could
I've
have
waited.
sold
I
it.
could have sold it.
But I waited.
You have breached it. The natural thing coming as a result of a breach, because it's a contract, damages naturally flow. And damages is like compensation for
Trauma.
the fact that, no, it's not trauma. Compensation for the fact that we had an agreement and you have breached the agreement.
So the seller might therefore receive even more than the cost of the
No, they're not gonna get
parcel of
more
land.
than the cost of the parcel of land. They will get damages, and how much damages they get will be depend upon what they could have done after while waiting on you, and you fully well knowing that you may not get loan approval. So that's why it's best for purchasers to approach to see if they're pre-approved before entering into
And that's why
a
sellers
written
need to demand the
contract.
deposit.
You can demand a deposit, and if you don't complete it, the deposit is automatically forfeited. But
Wait.
yes,
Demand a deposit.
And-
And if by the completion date
or agreed extended.
or agreed extended time, the additional sum is not available, then
The deposit is forfeited.
So you mean I keep the deposit if
Yes,
I'm the
because
seller?
that's the damages for the breach of the contract. If it is you're not paying a deposit, you can always put a clause in the agreement that breach resulting from the contract, you are to pay me a figure. So
A
that
10% of
you don't have to be 10%. You can say maybe 5,000 or 6,000,
Okay.
or you can say the
Half.
equivalent of whatever. Not half, because half would be onerous.
Unreasonable.
But you can say 10%
Yes.
or 5 or 6,000. So that would be the damages for you breaching the contract. And likewise, sellers also have to realize that they themselves also have responsibilities.
Meaning?
They have to ensure, like, let's say you're selling a piece of land. You have disclosed to me that a financial institution has an interest in the parcel of land. I am aware of that. It's indicated in the sales agreement. Further to that, any other consents that may be required in the case of an estate, any consents required by any beneficiaries, the seller undertakes to get all the consents. Likewise, the seller is responsible for the payment of their property taxes.
So all I'm responsible for
Is
is the
to
cost of the land.
Yes, to complete.
You deal with all the other expenses.
You deal with all the other expenses ordinarily. You can agree otherwise, but ordinarily, the seller's responsibility is to ensure that they have the authority to sell. The property taxes are cleared. If the property taxes aren't a lot, lawyers normally just deduct whatever property taxes there are. That you have a boundary verification if your land has not been verified within the last 10 years. So that's your responsibility. And to ensure that any encumbrances noted on the register are cleared. But what you find happening is that once a financial institution is involved, the seller really is supposed to, you get your valuation. If your valuation is a good valuation, your valuation is $150,000. You owe the bank $80,000. It's always best to just tell
You
the
have
purchasers,
70,000 remaining.
tell the purchaser's attorney, deduct what I owe to the bank, pay it over to the bank. That way there's no issue in clean title being passed to the
And
purchaser.
sometimes that's a problem.
And sometimes that's a problem. But what you find happening is that, and sellers also need to understand that there is a stamp duty amount payable to the government. A lot of sellers don't seem to know that. They think that I'm selling my land for 120,000. 120,000 is what I'm getting in my hand. No. There is a 7.5% stamp duty payable to the government, a 2.5% stamp duty as it relates to the purchaser.
10% so far.
10% in total, a proportion, 7.5 to the seller, 2.5 to the purchaser. The parties can agree that the purchaser may take the full 10% or 5%, 5%, but as a starting point, the starting rate is, according to the law, 7.5% to the seller, 2.5 to the purchaser. So sellers,
because at all costs, the government must get
exactly
10%.
must get their government. Don't care how, as long as they get
work it
10%.
out. You
Work
deal
it
with
out
it, but
between
just
yourselves.
make sure you pay some money.
And that 10% applies to private lands. It doesn't apply to lands owned by government or chapter. The sellers pay their 2.5% irrespective. Crown and chapter not paying no 7.5 because they're the seller. But sellers must understand that there is a tax to be paid to the government.
Obligated to pay the tax.
We normally deduct it from the purchase price, so you would get 120,000 less 7.5%. Seller. If that is what the agreement is. As I said, you can agree 5%, 5%, or you can agree you're going to take the full 10%. And what you find,
since you're getting a lot of money.
Not so much since you're getting a lot of money. Some persons want a flash sale. So the land may be valued 80,000 and they're willing to sell it to you for 70,000.
Yes.
In a situation like that, there's nothing wrong with the seller telling the purchaser, look at the valuation here. It's valued for 80,000. I'm selling it to you to for 70,000 because I need the money.
Yeah.
There's nothing wrong with the seller saying, take the full 10%. Because either which way, you as the purchaser, bingo. Because even if you take the full 10%, sometimes it's not even going to come up to what the value of the land is. But you must understand that there is a financial obligation on the part of sellers to the government
of Antigua and Barbuda. Wow, it seems as if everything we do, there's a tax applied.
Yeah.
I am in favor of taxes because I travel abroad and whatever I purchase, you generally have to pay a tax.
Yes.
So I am not averse to taxes at all. Just let me understand, please. What have you done with the funds that you've collected? Let me see some evidence.
Something, yes.
And I'm cool. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. I told you, you're going to be staying with us tonight because this is good information. Sherrie and Bradshaw is here. She's not going anyplace. We'll be right back. Stay with us, please. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. The purchasing agreement, the registration certificate, you said?
The land certificate or the land register.
The land register. And now there's another document because there's a transfer.
Yes, there is a transfer instrument, an instrument of transfer.
A formal instrument.
You ask, what is an instrument of transfer? Now, you have an agreement for sale. So the particulars of land are noted in the agreement for sale. So you know the block, the registration section, the block, and the parcel number. You know how much you're buying the land for. You know where the land is located.
And the name of the seller.
And the name of the seller is on the document. Yes. You know all of that. You have a duly executed agreement for sale. You're ready to close the transaction. The next thing is, how do I get
I haven't paid as yet.
No. You have to pay before you reach to the transfer.
Okay, so I've paid.
You've paid.
All right.
Everything is fine. Boundary verification. We've sorted out any issues. Property taxes are cleared. Nobody has an interest. Nothing. Everything is good.
So we're ready to transfer.
There is an instrument of transfer that is drawn up. That document would have been sent to the Inland Revenue Department for assessment. It comes back. And I'm going to give an example. And we're going to still use the same $80,000.
Yes.
We're purchasing a parcel of land in Gambles for Jane Doe. $80,000, John will be purchasing that parcel of land. Everything is good. There are no issues. We're ready to close the transaction. The cost of the land is $80,000. The Inland Revenue Department confirms the purchase price at $80,000.
Yes.
So Jane is called to come to the office of the attorney to close the transaction. What do you mean by closing the transaction? Closing the transaction is very simple. You present Jane with a closing statement as to how much she's going to receive as the net proceeds for the sale of the land.
Who prepares that closing statement?
The attorney for the purchaser.
Okay.
So Jane really ought to have known how much she's going to get, because remember, the agreement would set out what Jane's financial responsibilities are. So Jane would know, I'm responsible for 7.5%.
And
Jane would know
2.5%.
I'm responsible for the payment of any property taxes outstanding, if any. Jane would know I'm responsible for making sure that the boundaries of the land are in place.
And John has to pay 2.5%.
Well, John's attorney would incorporate it in his or her legal fees. So John would not be an issue.
Okay.
It would just be Jane right now, because John would have already signed the transfer documents. Jane comes to receive her money. What does Jane have to do? Jane has to present her ID to the purchaser's attorney to
Photo
verify.
ID?
Yes, because I need to know that you are the
Jane.
person appearing in front of me. If I know you personally, it's not necessary, but I need to know that Jane, this is the Jane that is for me. We have to be clear.
Definitely.
Yes, so Jane presents picture ID, driver's license, voter's ID.
Yes.
Passport is more ideal because it shows that you are a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda.
Yes.
So Jane presents her ID, all is well. Jane signs the instrument of transfer. Jane then receives her closing statement with her check. That's it.
Right, but you made a point there. She's a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda.
Yes.
So you're telling me she's not a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda, Jane could not have sold land?
Jane can sell land if she is not a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda, but Jane would have to pay the government a 5% appreciation tax.
Appreciation tax?
Yes, you are
What is that?
you're only allowed to hold land in Antigua if you're a citizen. If you're not a citizen, you have to get what is known as a non-citizen's landholding license.
Okay.
So if Jane is not a citizen, Jane would have had a non-citizen's landholding license in order to be registered as the owner. Jane is now selling the land. If government values, if she would have bought the land for $50,000 and she's now selling it for $60,000, there's an appreciation. So she pays a 5% on the appreciated
So she
amount.
pays 5% on the 10,000.
Yes, plus her 7.5% on the 60,000.
Because she's a
Non-citizen.
non-citizen. Wow. So when you
Well, they are aware of that, because when you get your license, you know that if you sell it and you're still not a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda, you have to pay an appreciation tax. You know that. Non-citizens know that. But however, if it is at the time she bought it, she was not a citizen of Antigua, and she subsequently got her citizenship.
So now
that
she's selling as a
right,
citizen.
That 5% wouldn't, that appreciation tax wouldn't apply to her, because she's selling being a citizen of Antigua.
So there are perks being a citizen.
Most definitely. Yes, most definitely. So the transfer instruments are signed. What is it? I, Jane, hereby
And
transfer.
this is a formal document.
It is a formal document.
Fixed?
It's fixed.
Okay.
I, Jane, hereby transfer, acknowledge receipt of the amount of $80,000, hereby transfer my parcel of land to John. That's it. It's signed. You flip to the other end. Certificate of transfer. That is where it states, I hereby certify. I hereby state that I'm a citizen of Antigua and Barbuda. And citizen must apply to the seller and the purchaser. Failing which, you need a license. and then
non-citizen license.
a non-citizen's license. And then there is a part for the Inland Revenue Department to sign to state that all property tax are paid up, and there is a part for the Chief Surveyor to sign that all boundaries are in place. That's it. It's filed at the land registry, and you get your land certificate issued to you in about a week and a half.
That is why the land registry is so important.
Important in the process.
After all these processes have been completed,
it has to go there.
It now rests finally
Yes.
with the land registry.
Yes, for registration.
Wow, I never realized the land registry was so important.
It's very, very
important. I thought it's just a
important.
place with a bunch of paper or a bunch of information, and you go and you get the information, maybe a printout or whatever.
No, it's very important.
It's a repository for a lot of important information.
It is a repository for all encumbrances, a repository for all transfer documents, bank documents, legal charges.
Wow.
They hold on to all your land certificates. If it is that a bank has an interest and they've filed
right
a
there.
charge, your land certificate is right there.
So that's an excellent place to start when you're purchasing land.
It
You're
is the
selling
place
land,
to start.
whatever you're doing about land, properties as well, like houses.
If
No?
the house is affixed to the land,
Yes,
yes.
but mostly land.
No, once the house is affixed to the land, the information
Then
is at
the
the land
information is
registry.
there as
Yes.
Whoa. This is a lot tonight. This is heavy. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. More information coming up. Stay with us, please. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. You've mentioned so many processes, and I totally understand. How is it then that people are guilty of building houses on other people's lands? If you have to certify the boundaries and the land registry has all the information, how is it that people still build on people's land? Some persons are saying it's deliberate.
Some of it may be deliberate, but you have to understand and appreciate that in terms of construction, the control of construction rests with the Development Control Authority.
So one should not build unless
They have a plan that is approved
By
from
the
DCA. Because in taking in your plan, DCA asks for the register. If you notice the register,
same
'cause
register,
the register
that's
is
so
the
important.
up-to-date
Yes.
document that gives the information. Because you can have a land certificate and the land certificate is not valid. The register shows accuracy.
Why would a land certificate not be valid?
The land certificate could have been cancelled by virtue of maybe you would have sold land and you didn't surrender the original land certificate and the production of the land certificate was dispensed with, or there was an issue with that land certificate and that land certificate was cancelled. The register would show
So
all of that.
always request
Register.
the register.
No matter
because
what.
the land certificate land certificate could be null and void.
Correct. The land register is more
most
important
up-to-date.
than, because it is updated.
Yes.
It gives you the up-to-date information as it relates to that specific block and parcel number.
So we are DCA.
So DCA asks for the register, and DCA would see from the register whether or not you are the legal owner or whether you have the right to even construct.
So they should question
When they see the register, if the
legality of
register
you
is not,
attempting to build
if the
on
register
that
is not in
particular
your
parcel of
name,
land.
they're not going to approve your plan. They're going to tell you, please bring a notarized consent from the owner, the registered owner of the land. So if people do build without consent on people's land, they would have been doing that illegally most times. Because they would not have had a plan that would have gone through
approved
DCA,
plan.
which was approved.
Now, if it's done deliberately, it therefore means that DCA now will have to become a part of the conversation.
If DCA knows,
Well, clearly, if somebody has built on your land, you're not going to just sit back there.
you might be surprised. Some persons actually just sit back. Yeah. For persons who don't sit back, all they have to do is go to the DCA department. DCA will send out one of their field officers assigned to the area, investigate to ensure that this is the parcel of land. This is owned by John
Comparing the
and
information
Jane.
with the register
They
again.
want to make sure that what is on paper is physically what is on the ground. And once it is confirmed that a property is being constructed on a parcel of land that doesn't belong to you, they will issue a stop notice.
But what does that mean?
You are to
cannot-
cease and desist.
You cannot continue with the construction?
Because you would not have
But
gotten
suppose it's
approval.
a really huge, expensive house.
That's your
That's
problem. You would not, you have to get a plan that is approved.
And suppose you continue to build.
It can be, you will then get another stop notice. I don't know how they deal with things there, but once you get a stop notice, the stop notice says you have to cease and desist. And if it is that you continue to build, that owner of land can actually take you to court. The owner has the legal right to take you to court because you would have trespassed.
But you can also negotiate with the owner, I'm sure.
You
to
can,
sell.
but if an owner decides that he doesn't want to sell
you
for
can't remove
sentimental,
the concrete building.
well, that is your problem. The building becomes mine, ain't it? Because it's on
Really?
my land. If you're going to expend monies to that extent to put a concrete structure, you may as well have gone through the proper channels.
So I wouldn't get a refund.
For what? You have trespassed. You have trespassed. You can negotiate with the seller to purchase the land. And if I was a seller, I would tell the seller, if I was a seller, I would tell the purchaser, you take in all the expenses.
So you might end up-
10% stamp duty, because there's nothing I can do with the land. You've already erected something on there. So it can only be fair that you take all
legal fees, everything.
Well, there would not be any legal fees per se.
Because this is an arrangement between seller and
so
buyer.
it would be the purchaser who would then have to ensure that he has the monies, he gets the financing, and he can complete the sale of the land.
It is said that this mostly happens in the countryside.
Yes. Because
I'm from country, so let me hear this.
you see, when you're in the country, you can get away with like knocking up a board house unbeknownst to the authorities, especially if they're not vigilantly checking in the area. But how persons in the country inform the DCA is that you might have neighbors and the land may belong to
somebody overseas
who they know, their uncle who live further down in the village and something like that. But most time it happens in the country a lot because, as I said, it's very easy just to knock up a little 2x4, like a 1-bedroom, 2-bedroom, and nobody knows.
Takes too
And
much notice.
some persons may even think that
it's a family member.
no, John, I put on something, man. Some persons think that it might even be John's land. When
Because he's so bold.
Not so much bold, but that he may have been there so long that they would have naturally thought it was his land. So they don't see the
building
need.
something now
right.
is not a big deal.
They wouldn't see
He's
the
just
need
expanding.
to report it because he's known to them, and he just renovating or expanding.
Oh boy, there are so many things that can go wrong.
Yes.
People have to be vigilant, always vigilant. Check on your land.
Check on your land.
Yes. Or if you're overseas,
Ask somebody
have
in the
someone
area
to check in
on
from
your
time to
yes.
time, because there are some really
And time can fly.
cruel people who will just decide, hey, these people are not doing anything
Check
with the
on your
land.
land.
I've been trying to purchase land for a while and this is just lying here, not being used.
Let me take a chance.
Let me take a chance because they're overseas. They may not even be returning to Antigua.
They may be dead.
Exactly.
And nobody for them has ever come, or if they come, they have no intent. They don't frequent Antigua often enough
Or
or
they might
long
not
enough.
have even known that
Correct.
this deceased parent or grandparent
Correct.
had property. So
Correct.
sometimes people just bingo
Yes.
and get people's land and people's property. Wow. Thank you for staying with us on the Paula Show. Tonight we have Sherrie and Bradshaw here with us, and we're just about to wrap up part 1 of our program. What's the key message based on what we've discussed thus far that you would like to leave with our audience tonight before we move on to part 2?
When you're purchasing land, your first step is you make a visit to the land registry. You ensure that you have an agreement for sale which you are comfortable with as a seller and purchaser. You ensure that if it is that you're going through a financial institution, that you would be pre-approved for the funding for the purchase of the land. And most importantly, I know persons don't really like to hear this, always get a lawyer involved. A purchaser will always have to get a lawyer because it's the purchaser's responsibility to prepare the instrument of transfer. But sellers don't normally have to get a lawyer, but the greater the transaction, I would advise that you get a lawyer. The greater the transaction.
All right, sounds like good advice, so that you don't end up losing.
So that you don't end up losing a whole, and that your obligations would have been fulfilled. But if it's a small amount, as I said, you don't need to get a lawyer.
But if it's
the greater the money, the greater the amount, you get a lawyer.
If you're selling land or property for hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars, Sherrie and Bradshaw is saying,
get a lawyer.
you need to contact her.
No,
We'll be
get a lawyer.
Thank you for watching the Paula Show tonight. And please remember to join us next week, Tuesday, for part 2 of our conversation with attorney at law, Sherrie and Bradshaw. Have a good evening. Goodbye.